Open the podcast bay doors, Hal.
Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 169 of Welcome to Geektown. I'm your host, Kurt Onstead. We're on the final deep dive of Season 2 of Loki, and with that ending, probably the final season. And as I point out in the beginning of my conversation with Anne, our episode titles make a nice bookend to each other. So, I guess we should start with the title of this episode, the last episode of Season 2, which was also the title of the first episode of Season 1.
Correct.
A nice little mirroring here.
And it is a line of Loki's from the Avengers that has often been quoted and cited and revisited over many a Marvel movie.
And throughout this series, quite a bit. Glorious purpose.
Sounds so wonderfully focused and pretentious, and yet.
And we get a little bit of a recap here that goes all the way back.
All the way back to the beginning, including Avengers.
Yes.
And it's a very thorough and relevant recap. I felt like I didn't write down specifically what was in everything, but it really got us up to speed as to where Loki is on this journey.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that having watched this recap, you don't need to have watched the rest of the season or anything.
No.
But they do a very good job of, if you, for some reason, took 5 weeks off between episode 5 and episode 6, you could watch that and be like, okay, yes, this puts me in the right headspace. I know where we are. I know where we've been. I know the road we've traveled. Reminded me a lot of the road so far.
Yes.
In the Supernatural season finale recaps, when they would give you a big, long, like, okay, this is everything you need to know.
Yep. It's a bullet point list. It's not very thorough. It's not very exacting, but it's enough to make your brain go, oh yeah, oh that, oh, okay, that, oh, I remember that. That was fun. Something like that.
And it also reminded me how long Tom Hiddleston has been playing Loki.
Seriously. Thor was 2011.
Yeah, he looks so young in those flashback scenes in the recap. It's like, okay, really, how much longer can he play an immortal god?
I think we'd let him play an immortal god for as long as he wants to.
Fair enough.
If he wants to come back to Loki, he can come back to Loki any damn time at any damn age he wants to, because he really gets the complexity of a character that has become very complex.
Yeah. This episode, this season, this show.
There were so many comments on my Facebook page this morning of, finale of Loki. I was crying.
Yeah.
Because it did the work to pull the tears from the viewer.
Yeah. It's very rare for me to cry, so I didn't for this, but...
Neither did I, but
it definitely tugged at the heartstrings.
Yeah.
Yeah. So after the recap, we get our Marvel Studios logo backwards.
Oh, was it? I didn't catch that.
What? You didn't notice that?
No.
It went from saying Marvel Studios, and then it pushed in. And then you see all the scenes. And yeah, it was completely backwards.
Nicely done.
They ran it in reverse, which I found appropriately amusing. And then we get into our replay of the first attempt at fixing the loom.
I love that they did the opening shot coming from the loom and pushing into the control room. You get through the glowing haze that is the loom, and then from the launcher down the gangplank and then up into the control room.
Yeah, through the glass and then into the room itself.
Yeah, right as Victor is heading off to get dressed.
Time to be brave.
Time to be brave. And we hear that quite a lot because we are now establishing that we are in a loop.
Oh, most definitely. The first replay here is basically the same as the one last episode.
Mm-hmm.
Although, when Victor heads out onto the gangway, the subtitles were a little different.
Oh.
They used one of my favorite words of all time when I see it in subtitles. Victor screams, squelching.
I take it squelching was used a couple of times episode before last as the Bach.
No,
oh, no, really?
This was the first time this word was used to describe that effect.
Squelching.
Yes. So
that's good.
I had to point that one out because I don't know why, but I love that word. It's almost onomatopoeic, and it just gives you the icks just from hearing the word.
Yeah. If you really choose to chew on the word too, that's when you can really get the onomatopoeia of it. Squelch.
Yeah.
Yeah. Really got to chew on it a little bit though. So the time travel plot structure of a time loop, we've seen, of course, this many times. The most famous example is Groundhog's Day. You know, you have to keep going through the process until you solve the problem.
But this one is a little different.
Oh, this one is different, yes.
Than Groundhog's Day or Happy Death Day or 1201, or I could name a bunch of movies that have the time loop.
And it seems like a requisite episode of like a television show where this could happen. Star Trek The Next Generation did it. Buffy the Vampire Slayer did it. Legends of Tomorrow did it. The new Quantum Leap did it.
Yeah.
You know, it's on the list. It's like you check off. Sometimes somebody's going to have to shrink too. I mean, there are rules.
But because Loki is in charge here, he can restart the loop wherever he wants.
Yes, which is a very nice modification of that plot structure.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's less tedious that way.
Yeah.
For both the audience and the character. We still have Loki's various levels of going again. And all of this is done each time they're still in the control room. He keeps going back just a little bit further and a little bit further and trying to speed things up as much as he possibly can. The music behind this is called A Fifth of Beethoven.
Yes.
And it's a Disco 5 Beethoven's Fifth. And it was also in Saturday Night Fever.
It's been used a number of places in pop culture. Like you said, it's a disco-fied version of Beethoven's Fifth. And it's just a great song because it has that structure, that classical structure to it, but it has that disco beat. And it sets up, this is serious, but it's fun.
Exactly. Which is the right tone to set at this point in the episode.
Yes. I referred to this as the first time loop montage.
Yes.
And some of my favorite little bits in this are when Loki comes into the war room, as we learn that's the name of it later, where Ravonna and Miss Minutes and Brad have Victor, and he looks at them and he's like, I know you're mad at me right now, but look, I need your help fixing this faster. And Miss Minutes just stops and blinks twice at him.
It's adorable. It is absolutely that beep, beep, what?
Yeah, no, you literally hear the blink noise. Yes. And Loki's line later of, I wasted time and now the time wastes me.
Yep.
And also in this montage, we get the first mention of setting the throughput multiplier down, which will come back later.
Yes. throughout this time loop, we get Loki continuing to do the short version of everything. It's everything we've already seen, but he already has the knowledge. So it's just like, okay, you do this, Obi, Victor, Obi, yeah, you wrote each other's books. Now here's the model and here's what we're going to do.
Yeah. Well, that comes at the very end of this montage, because he then goes, because the first montage is just, let's start from the beginning of this run, of this, running down the gangway. Let's just try to speed that up as much as we can. And he's like, okay, not faster, earlier.
Yep.
And that's when he goes through and speed runs the introductions and the plan.
Yep.
And asks OB, so if I really, really need to, how long will it take me to know everything that you know about mechanics, physics, and engineering?
To which Obi just kind of goes, decades. And Casey's the one who adds centuries. And
no, that was Victor. Victor added centuries.
You're right. Victor added centuries. And then we get a title card that says centuries
later.
My really interesting point when Loki has all of this physics knowledge that Victor and OB have, listening to him do the technobabble is kind of fascinating. This is where you really appreciate that Tom Hiddleston has very good Shakespearean training.
Yes.
Because he can rattle this stuff off clearly, concisely. It never gets mushy. I have no idea what he's talking about, but it does not get lost.
You're right. That is a very Shakespearean thing. A lot of the best actors in Star Trek, the ones who can do technobabble the best, have that classical training of being able to say words that most people don't use and don't understand.
Yes.
And being able to say it clearly, concisely, and with the proper emotion of, I know what the intent behind this is.
Yes.
And that is more important than what the actual words are.
Yeah. You don't need to speak the physics in order to communicate the physics in a plot relevant sort of way. I also love that when he starts doing this, he knows every quip somebody is going to say to him before they say it. Or as they're saying, he like immediately has a response.
Coming for your job. And we're getting into the big attempt.
Right.
And the way he delivers his lines in this attempt, he has emotion behind it, but at the same time, you can feel the fact that he's done this over and over and over again. And he knows exactly what he needs to say at this moment. He's done it before. He'll do it again if he has to. You're doing great. You're so brave.
Yes.
You're good.
It's all delivered with enough
it's
of
so
a
flat.
cheerleading. Yeah.
Yeah, he's cheerleading, but it's like, go team, go.
Yeah.
It's so flat and monotone because he's been through this before.
The point becomes the words need to be said, but the tone doesn't matter as much to him as getting them out fast enough so they can do this fast enough.
Yeah.
And making sure he doesn't miss anything. It's like there's a list, a checkoff list in his head of like,
oh, absolutely.
Okay, adjust your visor, make sure you're something
tape
else
it down
closed,
here, and here.
Yep. Casey,
latch the helmet. Even though we didn't have to see every single iteration, we can feel it in his delivery and in the little details of first step is a trip hazard. Second, he knows every little thing that's going to possibly go wrong along the way. Wait, I told you not to set it down.
Oh, the button can stick.
Yeah, the button's a little sticky. And so he speed runs them through this process and launches it.
Yep.
We finally make it to the launch of the throughput multiplier, and Victor makes it safely back.
Yep.
And as everyone's celebrating, the loom's adjusting to its new size.
Mm-hmm.
But wait, the loom is overloading again.
Yep.
Because you can't scale for infinity.
As is traditional in this plot structure, not necessarily the loop structure, but in the we have a problem to solve structure. In fact, you also see it in the legal procedural television show structure. The first thought, the first line of inquiry generally fails.
Right.
I know we've been doing this for the last several episodes, but this is still the first plan, essentially. And so it's kind of destined to fail, as is traditional plot structure on this television show.
I had kind of said last episode it'd be a very short episode this time if it
works.
Yeah, if it worked.
And following that kind of plot structure, I much prefer the we forgot to calculate for something instead of the we broke the thing and now we have to do something very dramatic in order to make the plan work.
Okay,
Armageddon is the first thing I can think of. It's like, well, we still need to do the thing, but we broke the thing that makes the thing happen. So Bruce
now
Willis
we have to
manually
sacrifice. Yeah.
Scaling for infinity, by the way, is an amazing concept.
Well, depending on the type of infinity, you can scale for it. But it's
sure.
There's different levels of infinity if you become a mathematician.
I will never become a mathematician.
Well, let me give you an example.
If you start talking about imaginary numbers, I'm out of here.
No, not going to give you imaginary numbers, but all of the counting numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4. That goes up to infinity. All of the decimal numbers also goes to infinity, but is a level of infinity that we can't even deal with compared to the counting numbers. The counting numbers, we can see it, we can imagine it, but we can't imagine all of the different decimal numbers that are in between even 0 and 1.
I'm going to get my revenge on you for this part of the conversation when we get to T.S. Eliot.
Okay, great. I'm looking forward to it. I copied down that entire poem. So Sylvie points out that as soon as the timeline started branching, this was doomed to happen.
Yep.
And so this is when we go to our second point in history that Loki tries to loop through a few times. Back to the end of season 1.
Yes, we have past Loki who put himself between Sylvie and He Who Remains back at the end of the first season. And our present Loki slips in. Past Loki gives kind of a, I've been where you are, the sympathetic, we shouldn't do this reason. Present Loki, when he slips in, it gets down to, here's why we can't do this. And is much more forceful. He's not going to try to get to her sympathy at this point. He's like, no, we can't do this.
Yeah, because he knows that tact didn't work last time.
Yep.
He has to try something different. And another thing different. And another thing different. And he keeps... So this is the second montage.
The second montage.
And we get the repetition of Sylvie's line.
Yes.
If you want me to stop, you'll have to kill me.
And she starts, they start with putting that a little more distant until it builds. It's the same line, of course, but it definitely builds on itself as the montage continues.
Yeah. There's little variations on it. Sometimes it's just... Sometimes it's, if you want me to stop, and sometimes it's, if you want to stop me.
Exactly.
But it's still the same basic message behind it. You're going to have to kill me, because I'm not stopping. And I love Loki's question to He Who Remains here. You can tell, again, he's been through this loop a number of times at this point, and he just looks back at He Who Remains as like, why don't you ever try to stop her? Fight back, do something.
Yep. Nope. It's the relaxation of inevitability.
But him asking that question is what gets He Who Remains to pause time.
Correct.
Because that's when it becomes obvious that it is not Loki's first time through.
Mm-hmm.
He knows this is a time-slipped Loki.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out that was all part of the plan.
Yep. All of this is He Who Remains machination. He Who Remains was always going to be there. And as he had said, like he said a couple times, reincarnation, baby.
And, we knew from Miss Minutes in an earlier episode that basically creating Victor was part of his plan as well. And he acknowledges that here by saying, and how is Victor timely? Which is an interesting way to mock yourself.
Yes. It shows a level, in that case, it's a level of self-hatred.
Yeah.
Timely is also He Who Remains, who is also Kang, who is also God knows how many names.
Who is
Immortus,
also...
yeah.
Yeah, he is all of them in a way. Although Victor is the only one that doesn't really make sense to me, because I don't think that the original He Who Remains was from the 19th century.
No, probably not. Victor might be the progenitor of all of them.
Perhaps.
Being that's the only implication. Again, my knowledge on Kang is limited to the MCU, but that is the only implication of childhood we ever see.
Yeah. In the comics, there is a Victor Timely, but it is just Kang in a disguise, basically.
Right.
But anyway, back to the show.
Mm-hmm.
You have promised your revenge.
With T.S. Eliot.
Yes.
Yes. As this discussion between He Who Remains and Loki is going, Loki quotes, "We die with the dying, but born with the dead," which is from T.S. Eliot's poem Little Gidding, which is part of the 4 quartets from 1942, which is a series of poems that discuss time, perspective, humanity, and salvation, which is straight from Wikipedia because, quite frankly, it was well phrased.
Yes.
Got to the point.
And Eliot is British, isn't he?
He is American and British. He was born in America, educated in America, but he went to London for one of his levels of education, and I can't remember which one, and then married. His first wife was English.
Okay.
So yeah, he became a British citizen eventually. But yeah, he's both American and British. And there's a lot of T.S. Eliot in the Marvel Universe at this juncture. Somebody that is overlooking the writing room must be a fan, because not only is this poem quoted, but a little spoiler for the Marvels, there's a reference to cats, which is a very strong reference to cats, which is based off of T.S. Eliot's Old Possum's book of Practical Cats.
Yes.
But back to Little Gidding, which is...
I just want to point out with the 1942 date is that because he was living in Britain at the time, that is right smack dab in the middle of World War II for him.
And not just World War II, but we're talking the Blitz.
Yeah.
London is being bombed on a nightly basis. Eliot his work is considered part of the lost generation of poets. He's in there, Ezra Pound is in there, a lot of the Jazz Age writers are in there. These are all the people who lived through World War I. World War I was a very scarring experience on the countries that went through it. It was a very different warfare than all the ones before it. This is the introduction of machine guns and barbed wire and mustard gas. This was a very
technology. Yeah, technology did a number on warfare and made things deadly on a scale that had never been seen before.
Never been seen before. And it was impersonal. It was very impersonal. Wars before that, you saw your enemy. Even when you had firearms, they were not so good that you could be at a long distance from your enemy before you could shoot them. So the generation that experienced that and the ones that survived, and that really is saying something. A third of the male population that was of age to go to war did not come back. It wiped out noble families.
Yeah.
They're just families that lines that end because their sons did not come home. There was a disillusionment, was a very big part of the writers of this time. I mean, that was just kind of part of the modernist stuff that was happening even before the war, but the war really cemented a bleakness, being part of the machinery, which had become an issue as the Industrial Revolution was. I mean, the revolution was way over, and now you were seeing the side effects of it.
Yeah.
Losing touch with the natural world, or the natural just, you're now regulated by a clock. You were a cog in a machine. It was impersonal. The poem that Loki is quoting is very specifically cited as an example of the loop of all of creation, essentially. We go to war, we try to learn from it, but we're going to be back at it again. A lot of writers at this time were dealing with, guys, we already did this. Why are we doing it again?
Mm-hmm.
In fact, Virginia Woolf was so affected by the start of World War II. That's one of the causes for her killing herself. I mean, she had a lot of issues going in, but she could not take the incoming war. And I mean, she was a contemporary of Eliot's. So we once again see this discussion of cycles of, who invented who created what, the Ouroboros, the Mobius strip of it all.
Mm-hmm.
What is going to be again.
Yeah. I mean, both Loki and He Who Remains at some point say, what makes you think this is the first time we've had this conversation?
Exactly. And He Who Remains pushes, this is how it's always going to go. And even if Sylvie kills him, that's going to means that multiversal war happens again, because it's going to happen again. It's going to always be who creates who, what begins what. It's all just a loop. It is not a start or finish.
Mm-hmm.
I found it interesting that He Who Remains was a little surprised when Loki says the poetic line. He's just kind of like, oh.
I didn't read that as surprise. I read that more as
impressed at the big brain on Loki.
Not really impressed, but more like, oh, okay, well, if you're going to be pretentious about it. It felt very much like, okay, I know you're referencing something, but I have no idea what you're referencing, so we're just going to move on from that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fair enough. That being said, it kind of speaks to how out of touch He Who Remains is with the actual sentient beings, or even non-sentient beings, that are within all of time and creation.
Well, not knowing a single poem from, the one particular poem.
Yeah, but he also dismisses it so easily.
True.
It's like, heck with your art and beauty. Time will always plunge forward. Whatever, you little mortal creature. Yeah. To which, Loki's a god, but whatever. I feel like this conversation they have also establishes that reincarnation is totally a thing within the MCU. Because he Who Remains very clearly says, I'm going to get reincarnated.
And I guess that's the explanation for Victor Timely.
Yes.
Is that he is one incarnation of He Who Remains.
Yes.
He can be reincarnated at various points on the timeline.
Whether you drop a book in his window or not.
Right. And He Who Remains is like, okay, you may need to go through this a couple thousand more times before you're ready to have a conversation. But then Loki pulls a surprise on He Who Remains by pausing time himself.
Yep. And saying, this ain't the first time we've done this.
Yeah. There was an article or a YouTube video or something that went through and tried to figure out how many times Bill Murray's character looped in Groundhog Day and how much time he spent in that day And I don't remember what the final tally ended up being, but I think it ended up being like hundreds of years or something
Good
like
God.
that to learn everything about each person in town, to learn all of the new skills he learned everything. Yeah, it was a very, very long time. I think that's nothing compared to what Loki did.
No, I think,
Because
well, I mean, they literally
we've
told
already
us
established that it was
centuries.
centuries before the second montage.
Yes. How many times did he fight Sylvie? How many times did he and He Who Remains have that conversation?
Yeah. But it's in this version of that conversation that Loki finally learns that the loom was never there to control the. Well, it was there to control the branches, but not in the way that everyone thought it was.
Correct. It is a failsafe.
Yeah. Anytime it gets overloaded with branches, it's just going to delete everything but the sacred timeline.
That deletion includes the TVA, and it's so easy to rebuild.
Yeah, well, it didn't include the TVA by intent. He said that's just,
part of
a
the way
side
it
effect.
goes.
That is just part of the aftermath. That's But yeah, he says, we can rebuild it. That's not
Yeah.
a problem. And that makes perfect sense with the way He Who Remains works.
Yeah.
He knows from his point of view that this is all going to happen again and again and
again
again.
and again. I noted another parallel to the First World War, that it was also very much just the machine that just kept throwing soldiers into battle that were not going to do much. The generals were kept at a distance. They were not connected to the people that they were sending in to fight. They just kept throwing troops, a line of soldiers at another line of soldiers.
Yeah.
Infinite cycle of it.
Yeah. Have you seen Blackadder Goes Forth?
Yes. And if I were teaching World War One at any given point, I would be showing the last episode to my students because it is amazing. And audience, here's another thing on your viewing list. I recommend all of Blackadder.
Especially seasons 2, 3, and 4.
Yes. One is working on it.
One is still finding its footing.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, the last episode of Blackadder Goes Forth, taking place in World War One, is one of the finest depictions of how that went. That is out there.
Yeah.
1917, by the way, is very good as well. And I have not seen the new All Quiet on the Western Front, but I had to read that twice, so I'm okay with
that. You're like, I've done that story.
It's a heavy piece.
Yeah. But anyways, back to this show. This is where He Who Remains says, doesn't matter, the outcome's always the same.
Always the same. I love Loki's stubbornness of not giving up, which I feel like is a real sign of growth for him, that earlier on in his MCU appearances, he really might have said, okay, well, moving on.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's not giving up.
Can I get a seat at the table? That's
exactly.
all I want. But no, he's like, I'll change the equation.
Yep.
I'll break the loom.
Break the cycle.
Which would break the cycle, but He Who Remains points out that it would also kill everything, even the sacred timeline. And says to Loki, what'll that do to your friends? What?
Mm-hmm. And then He Who Remains gives the martyrdom speech of somebody, and it's him, has to make the big choices all alone at the end of time because somebody has to.
Yeah. And that's why he gets the big chair.
And that's why he's get the big chair. So Loki is kind of down to two choices here. It's either break the loom, which will bring forth, which will end everything, and there's going to be the great multiversal war, or kill Sylvie, and then Loki and He Who Remains protect what they can of the timeline. That is it. Those are your choices.
Those are the choices as he sees it right now.
Yes.
And so he wants to get some advice. He wants to
Yes.
talk to somebody he trusts, who knows something about making those kinds of choices. And so we go back all the way to the first episode of Loki, season 1.
Mm-hmm. Smashes right back to Time Theater 25
Yeah.
as Loki and Mobius
Loki's
are having their
first
first
interview.
conversation.
Yeah.
Yep.
And just the scene is so poignant.
Mm-hmm.
It's so interesting because from Mobius's point of view, he really doesn't know this Loki yet.
Nope.
He knows very little about him except for what he knows from the sacred timeline.
Well, and what he has on file. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a detective thing at this point. He has a file on Loki.
But the Loki that comes in is his friend.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you can kind of feel Mobius come around to that as the conversation continues.
No, I agree. Because they get into it leaves the convincing Loki to help the TVA track down his variant, which was season 1.
Sylvie, yeah.
To getting into the philosophy of the TVA, the core of the work behind the TVA. There is the list of TVA dogma that you can pull out very clearly from this. Mobius does not believe that pruning equals death. Nobody is dying. They don't exist.
They're just pruning.
They're just pruning it.
You know, when you think about pruning in its original sense, when you're pruning a bush or something like that, you're usually cutting off dead branches so that the trunk, the core
Mm-hmm.
will thrive better. And so that's how Mobius sees it, is
Correct.
You're cutting off the dead bits, you're cutting off what can't survive on its own in order to help the main timeline thrive.
Exactly. The timekeepers dictate the proper flow of time. The TVA in season 1 had an absolute faith that there were 3 timekeepers who absolutely knew what the right thing was. They did not question that. And through season 2, well, I mean, we start questioning it in season 1, and then through season 2 is, okay, now that we have destroyed the institution, what do we do? I believe it's Loki who says untangling the epilogue from its infinite branches.
Yes,
is what the timekeepers do.
Yes, and that is a callback to a line from season 1. Mobius describes it that way.
Yes. And Mobius really likes the term the big picture, focusing on the big picture, which is what the TVA is trained to do. To think about time as a big picture, not as individual lives being lived.
Yeah, and he tells this story here.
Yes.
It reminds me of the classic question that whenever you bring up time travel, someone will ask, if you could go back and kill baby Hitler, would you? Yes. And this isn't even baby Hitler. This is like, would you go back and kill Mrs. O'Leary's cow when she was a calf?
Yeah.
Because this 8-year-old child, somehow, they don't go into the details of it, but somehow just going about his normal business was going to cause 5,000 deaths that weren't supposed to happen on the sacred timeline. Now, obviously, on the sacred timeline, there are events like that do happen.
Yes. As Doctor Who likes to say, they are fixed points in time. You can't mess with them.
Right. And in this show, those are the things that are supposed to happen in order to get to the proper ending.
Right. Sacrifices must be made.
Yeah. But in order to stop these 5,000 deaths, Mobius was supposed to kill an 8-year-old child. And my feeling was obviously he doesn't say it because this version of Mobius doesn't know,
Hmm.
but I'd say one of those kids was right around 8 that Dawn
Yes.
had.
Yes.
And so, that little part of him that was still obsessed with jet skis was still that little part of Dawn was like, you can't kill an 8-year-old. That's like killing your son.
Yes. And of course, the hunter next to him was able to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And the hunter next to him became a judge, while the guy who couldn't kill the 8-year-old became an analyst. So that's Ravona, who became the judge.
Yes.
Which, let's take a moment. Remember, Ravona, her variant was a high school principal. And so you speak of like the Mobius is going,
I know
no,
enough high
no
school
high school
principals. I have no problem believing that they would
Yes.
kill an 8-year-old.
Yes. They're going, no.
Yep.
Nope. Totally get that.
The greater good.
The greater good. Mobius and Loki talk about comfort. What helps comfort you through doing these things that have to be done according to the timekeepers. And Mobius says straight to him, there is no comfort in the TVA. There is no glory in their burden.
I love the line, most purpose is more burden than glory.
Yes.
It was just such a wonderful twisting of that phrase.
Mm-hmm.
We've been hearing all along, I'm burdened with glorious purpose. I'm burdened with glorious purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a burden.
Yeah.
You may think, you're probably thinking all about the glorious part, but don't forget, you're burdened with it.
The glory did not come with no price, no weight to it. Through this conversation that they have, there's a point where they have a straight shot of Loki and then a straight on shot of Owen Wilson having this discussion. Yes. And it's very beautiful and very poignant. It's a way to bring the audience into this conversation. This is could you do this? Could you handle this? What comfort could you find? And could you carry the burden? Could you make the hard choices and even the impossible choices?
I found it interesting that at the end of this conversation that Mobius and then the rest of the TVA spaghetti's out.
I feel like the writers ran into a couple of occasions where they weren't sure how to end something.
Okay.
And so they just ended it and moved to the next scene. I feel like that happened with the end of He Who Remains and Loki's conversation. That they didn't really come to any sort of conclusion. They just cut to Loki back at the time theater. And this had the same thing where they got the ideas out that they wanted to, but they didn't come to any sort of conclusion, solution, or progress. And so they said, okay, well, we can't just cut to the next thing. We already did that. We will have Mobius spaghetti out.
Yeah. I kind of wonder if an in-story explanation is that Loki's time slipping is part of what's breaking things.
No, that's a good idea. Yeah.
When you notice that Mobius spaghetti's out first, and it's when he shakes Loki's hand.
Yes.
So he touches something that's not supposed to be there.
Yep. And then the spaghettification happens.
Yeah.
And then Loki moves himself back to AD's bunker.
Yep.
Just as everyone is starting to spaghetti out.
Yeah. In my notes, I said back to AD's lab in the end of that universe.
Yes. Good. Yeah, Loki stops time so he can have a moment talking with Sylvie.
Mm-hmm.
And he catches her up.
She very quickly realizes, oh, you have to kill me.
Yep.
I absolutely love her reaction to it. If this were a different story, if this were a more cliche plot, she would say, I understand.
Uh-huh.
But no, nope. I'm not going to give you my blessing if that's what you're waiting for.
Yep.
And this whole conversation here, it's repetitive in some ways, but it doesn't feel repetitive necessarily.
She's summarizing, and in a certain way, she's kind of talking herself into a corner a little bit. Because I listened to this a couple of times and I kept going, I don't know about this. So for Sylvie, the sacred timeline equals death and injustice and a lack of free will.
Right.
You know, the TVA has made the choice of this is what is going to happen, and all the other choices that people have made don't matter. They are pruned away. But the problem is, without somebody enforcing the timeline or a timeline there, without some control, the whole thing is going to end up collapsing under its own weight. And we're talking multiversal wars.
And possibly the end of everything.
And possibly the end of everything, which, and then Sylvie goes, well, what about trying? What about going down in the fight? But that, the normal people don't fight. You know, people living their day-to-day lives, if Don selling jet skis is not going to be fighting in any sort of time war. He's just going to vanish because his timeline is pruned. You know, it's not that folks on other branches are choosing to fight for their existence. There's not really free will necessarily being exercised there. It's just people have the opportunity to live their lives as they choose to, but without any sort of, there's no tie to a greater thing to it.
And a line she says near the end of this is, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, is, I've lived through enough apocalypses to know that sometimes it's okay to destroy something.
Yes.
And you're trying to talk Loki out of killing you?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know.
That is an argument that's... Yeah, that is an argument that says it's okay to kill something in order for something else to survive.
Yes. Yeah, I don't think she makes a good case for just letting time do whatever it's going to do. No, it's, not a terribly good case. And then Loki says, well, if you can replace that thing with something better. And then
if there's a hope, if there's a hope that you can replace that thing with something better, that's what's important. Is the hope. Yes, there is the sacred timeline, but we need other timelines in order to make sure that the sacred one is the best. Yes. What if there is a better timeline? And so this is when Loki returns once again to the Loom Chamber.
For the last couple of scenes between the conversation with He Who Remains, then with Mobius, then with Sylvie.
Mm-hmm.
By that first one, he's starting to get this inkling of what he needs to do. That's to change the equation.
Yeah.
Talking
rewrite
with
the
Mobius,
story.
Yeah, rewrite the story. That is, and then the conversation with Mobius is, okay, let's see make sure what the story is that I'm going to change. Talking to Sylvie is what changes would work, would be better, would improve how the universe or multiverse works. Mm-hmm. So he's just kind of creating a plan and confirming what he's thinking through those scenes. It seems to me that from nearly the beginning of this episode, he's known kind of what he needs to do. Not exactly in a firm plan kind of way, but
he has a general idea.
Yeah. He's got an inkling.
It kind of comes back to my thoughts at the end of last episode. In his own way, he's going to become the god of stories.
Yep.
And yeah, this scene, God, the music in this scene.
It's still so the gorgeous. Same. It's the same Loki theme, but it's so, the Loki theme is extremely variable. You change the orchestration, you change the rhythm a bit, Probably change the key a bit. I'm not a big music person, technicalities.
Yeah, and
Um,
you can do you there are some minor variations in the melody as well.
yes.
So it's not exactly the
Mm-mm.
same theme every time, but you get that same chord progression,
Mm-hmm.
that same motif. Loki goes down and says, "I know what kind of god I need to be for you,
Mm-hmm.
for
For
all of
all of
us."
us.
And at this moment, I will point out that we get one and only one for this episode, and the final, most likely, hair flip.
Our finest and most thorough hair flip.
Yes.
Because I remember it being a very big hair flip.
Oh, yeah. No,
Yeah.
he opens those doors, and that first wave hits him, and he goes down to brace and then flips back and walks out there, no suit,
Nope.
at least not
Yeah, no bomb suit.
radiation. Yeah, no bomb suit, just his TVA outfit.
And we watch all the radiation just rip away all the TVA clothing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it reveals clothing underneath. And this is not a literal thing. This is very symbolic. It is they it strips away the Loki as TVA agent and replaces it with Loki becoming the god of stories.
Yes, his Asgardian outfit, very loose, flowing clothes, cape, full-sized horns.
Well, and all of this is very different from what we've seen. I mean, it's very Asgardian. It fits within that milieu, but
Mm-hmm.
it is still very different. There is no armor. There's no armor.
True.
There's no weapons. The only thing that looks like it might be metallic is the crown and horns. And even that is not well shaped. They are very rough hewn. The cloak that is behind him is there for the drama, and very effective at it. And it's going to have a better use shortly.
Yes.
They make very much a very pointed shot of the shoes that he is wearing, that they're very simple. They're just leather slippers, essentially.
Yeah.
But all of it is in a very, very old style. I mean, it's like proto Asgardian as much as it is Asgardian. There's no time period to this outfit, no particular style. The rumpling of it is a very rumpled and not a
Not
very
fitted.
unshaped. Yeah, not fitted.
Yeah.
It doesn't have a very exacting shape.
No, it
Anybody
looks
who's
like anybody who is about the same height as him could wear this, and
yes, if somebody wants to cosplay this Loki, it's going to be kind of a pain to put this outfit together correctly.
but I'm
Because
gonna
it
love to
is
see it.
seriously, it is because it is so randomly rumpled and ruched. There's no logic
Mm-hmm.
to it. It is supposed to look like kind of bundled on. And it's a lot of folds and drapes that you're going to have to like really sew down in order to hold that shape.
Yeah, and yeah, he breaks the loom,
Yep.
and all the branches are dying, and he grabs one branch and just tries to put his energy into it. He tries to,
He
use it.
imbues it with his magic.
Yes, but it's not quite enough
Mm-mm.
at this point.
There's a certain amount of experimentation that has to go on.
Yeah, but he grabs some more of them, and at the same time, he opens a portal in the far distance to the Citadel at the end of time. And that shot you mentioned earlier of his shoes,
Mm-hmm. As he's
he is,
climbing the steps that are not there.
yes, he is literally ascending.
Yep.
and he's ascending into this portal, taking all of these timelines with him.
Mm-hmm.
And that shot of the branches of time flowing out of his cape and
Mm-hmm.
from the gathered bundles in his hands.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and
No,
the
this was so
music,
beautifully
all of
made.
this is so gorgeous.
Mm-hmm.
Just no tears, but chills.
Yes.
As I do, I watched this episode 3 times for this show, and every single time we got to this scene, I was just in
Mm-hmm.
awe and just dumbstruck with how beautiful and majestic it was.
There's so much that is happening on Hiddleston's face, first off.
Mm-hmm.
The difficulty of this task of gathering these branches, of moving against the current of time, or whatever that is that they're pushing against. It always felt like a current to me.
Yeah.
It is clearly hard. It is clearly a lot of work. It is something he has to try very hard to do. It is heavy both emotionally and physically and spiritually, because we are not talking, necessarily the physical part of it. There's more to it than that. He does give one last look goodbye to the control room,
Yeah.
which is just full of, pain, regret, and an understanding that this is what he has to do.
Yeah. This is his burden.
Yep.
That comes with his new
Mm-hmm.
glorious purpose.
Yeah, and as he's gathering the branches, because as you talked about, they become part of his cloak. There's so much of that, I think, that he's just taking in what's in the branches and transferring it into himself in order to pull all of this together.
Yeah. Yeah. And then he takes the throne. He has made the hard choice, and
Mm-hmm.
so he gets to sit in the big chair.
Well, and the path up to the big chair, this is the destroyed castle of He Who Remains.
Yeah.
It is the black stone with the gold veins, and the gold from the veins run up the hill and into the chair in order to make it a golden throne.
It's a little touch of home.
Mm-hmm.
It did very much remind me of the throne of Asgard
Mm-hmm.
when it turned golden like that. And then he pulls all the branches in close to himself.
He spins them.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
spins
Well,
them.
he spins them, and when it first we get that first explosion out, and at first when it pulls out, it looks like a new loom.
Yes.
Almost, but with no mechanics to it.
Right.
But it has that kind of hourglass shape that the original loom has, but then we pull out further,
Mm-hmm.
and the shot rotates,
Mm-hmm.
and we see it's not a loom.
And every
It's
literary
a tree.
Yes. And we know what this tree is. Everybody, well, not everybody, but
If you are a scholar of Norse mythology at all,
or read
or
three
have
stories,
or watched the Thor movies,
mm-hmm.
you know this is Yggdrasil. This is the tree of the 9 realms.
Yep. Which Thor points out in the first Thor movie, explaining the universe to Jane Foster. This is what holds the cosmos together within the MCU cosmetology. In the mythology, we're talking about a sacred ash tree around which everything exists, including the 9 worlds or realms, which are different than the MCU ones, but there are still 9 realms. They didn't pull that out of thin air. And the stories go that Odin sacrificed himself by hanging on a tree, which is generally believed to be Yggdrasil, for 9 days to learn the sacred runes. And there are also lots of associations with gallows and horses. And it was not unusual for some druidic Scandinavian pre-Christian practices to hang animals from ash trees as a sacrifice to Odin. And the gods of Asgard are supposed to hold court at Yggdrasil.
Right. Something I will point out, just to go into overthinking it mode here. If you read the full poem of Little Gidding, a line in there is the moment of the rose and the moment of the yew tree are of equal duration. And some people will argue that Yggdrasil is not an ash tree, but is a yew tree instead.
Mm-hmm.
And so we get that repetition there of the tree, even though it wasn't directly referenced in the earlier moment.
I did a little research at this point to confirm what I already knew and get more specifics on Yggdrasil, and ran into Screen Rant talking about, I don't know if they have more insider information or this was the writer's interpretation of what this particular incarnation, Loki's incarnation, means. And so they described it as a multi-universal tree, the structure that holds the universe together. So this is now where we're going to have some sort of connections between various universes within the MCU.
Right. I wonder if, unfortunately, they probably weren't able to plan this far enough ahead in order to do this, because animation takes a long time. But it would be amazing if future seasons of What If, we see the tree rather than
the Watcher.
The Watcher can still be there, but that he is looking at different branches on the tree rather than the old version of the branches, which was just lines coming out in various fractal type formations. So the universe is reborn.
Yes.
As Yggdrasil, with multiple branches on it. And then we get another title card, which is simply
After. Time for some denouement.
And a good chunk of it, too. This was, I was pleasantly surprised by how much wrap-up we got here. In previous Marvel shows, the final episodes have felt very rushed.
Right.
The pacing always felt off. In this one, I did not feel that at all. It felt like the perfect amount of time wrapping up the story and then giving us a nice breath to touch base with our the rest characters. Of the cast. Our core characters, and see where they're headed in the next phase of their stories. And the first thing we see after the after card is a new TVA poster.
Yep.
I love the saying on here. Let's grow together, nurture our nature for a stable future.
It's certainly a new direction.
Absolutely.
They make the new direction of the TVA very clear. B-15 is who we're following through this. She's checking on how things are going. Obi is there fixing something or putting together, I don't remember what.
He's reconstructing Miss Minutes.
Yes.
With who hopefully won't try to kill them this time.
Yep.
The expression on Obi's the little shrug he gives B-15 when she asks if that's going to happen. Again, Ki Hui Kwan gives such a perfect performance of this character throughout. Yep. And I just laughed at that. And B-15 is obviously in some position of authority at this point. She is one of many people. It seems like it's quite a council that is collected in the war room.
Yeah, it seems to be far more of a board situation than a single leadership situation. So she checks with our Mobius before heading into the boardroom. Casey's on his way to the boardroom. Good for Casey.
Yeah, yeah.
They are looking into He Who Remains variants, including a ruckus on 616 adjacent realm.
So this is an obvious reference to Ant-Man and Wasp Quantum Mania.
That's what I figured. I wasn't positive, but that's what I figured.
Except the only thing I will say is that 616 is not correct.
Oh no.
616 is the main comic book universe.
Uh-huh.
We have an Earth number for the MCU.
Mm-hmm.
It is Earth 199999.
It's a lot of nines.
It is a lot of nines. But that is the established Earth number for the MCU. Kevin Feige wants desperately for the MCU to be Earth 616.
Why?
Because that is known as the main Marvel universe.
Oh, yeah. Okay, fair enough. Sort of. Yeah, it's a bit of a power trip there, Kevin.
A little bit.
A little bit.
And what I think is very funny is that the first time that was established in the MCU, the first time their Earth gets named as Earth 616 is by Mysterio, who is not actually a multiversal traveler.
Nope.
And is just completely making it up off the top of his head.
Huh.
But then in later stories like this one and I believe Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, they also refer to the MCU's main timeline as Earth 616.
Gotcha. Making the comic book community grumble.
Yes, because there can't be two 616s.
Well, this is 616 adjacent realm. But then again, that's
well, I figured the adjacent realm
was
referring to the quantum realm.
Yes.
So, enough on that little Easter egg there. We see Mobius has his file as requested. He's looked, he's learned, and he's heading home.
Yeah. Curious to see what he's been protecting all of this time.
Yeah.
Now, he has this conversation that he's leaving with B-15 in front of the Timekeeper mosaics. And B-15 says, we're talking about taking them down. And Mobius kind of shrugs and is like, yeah, but, those who don't learn the past, doomed to repeat it.
Yeah, I like that he doesn't complete that saying.
Yes.
That he lets you fill it in on your own.
Which we all can, and if we can't, you should pay closer attention. I love when we get into the conference room, into the war room, that it is just full of people talking with each other, which is not something we've seen at the TVA before.
No, this is a much more personal.
Yep.
It's not top down. This one person or three beings will tell everyone what is to be done. There is discussion to be had and decisions to be made. And a lot of people involved in doing it from different walks of life and different parts of the TVA.
And the attitude generally within the room is there's a lot of camaraderie happening. There are generally smiles on people. I mean, it's not a happy, fun party, but it's not the emptiness, the empty grind of work that we got in the first season. These aren't office drones anymore. They are people who work for a big company who enjoy each other's company and solving the problems that they have to solve.
And the other thing I noticed in there was that there was a lot of moving around.
Yes.
There's a lot of, okay, I've gotten this person's opinion. Let me go over and talk to this person.
Exactly. I showed you this thing. Now I'm going to show you this thing.
Yeah. And we get kind of a final montage here as we cut from person to person to see their denouement. We see OB is unpacking the second edition of the TVA guidebook.
Mm-hmm.
Then we cut to young Victor, who does not get the handbook that
Nope.
he did in another timeline.
Nope. He's just busy making candles.
And then my favorite cut here is Renslayer is in, I called it the Purge Lands in my notes here.
It's a good name for it because I couldn't remember if it had a proper name or not. Finally, we have somebody waking up in a field.
There you go.
I've been waiting for somebody to wake up in a field for a while. Renslayer wakes up in a field.
I did think of that the first time I was watching through. I was like, hey, she's waking up in a field. Oh, that's not the field she wants to wake up in.
No.
And it looks like, I mean, we don't see it for sure, but I'm pretty sure Eliath consumed Renslayer there. So that is probably the last we see of her.
They don't give us a reverse shot there. It's true. We get the purple light and some crashing thunder.
But we get that big roar.
Yeah, we get a big roar, and we get her looking very determined. She's not afraid of being eaten by a lion, if that's the case. We also get the shot there of the ruins of ATVA.
Mm-hmm. And if you remember in an earlier episode, they had covered up different letters to make it time author instead of time variance authority.
Mm-hmm.
And in this version of the logo, it was the bottom of it. And so instead of saying for all time, always, it just said me, always, which I thought was perfect for Renslayer.
Yes.
Because that was who she thought of, was me. But yeah, we cut away from her, most likely dying, but if they need to bring her back for some reason later, it's open enough.
Mm-hmm. Plenty of wiggle room there. And we get back to Don Mobius of Ohio.
Well, that's the interesting thing, is that we get Mobius watching Don from across the street.
Yeah.
In the earlier scene, when he said he was, basically going home and seeing what this was all about, I assumed that he would
take his place on that timeline instead of
his
just
branch
watching. All he's doing is observing. He's not ready to live a life on the timeline. The simple fact is he's just not ready to enter a mundane existence that is, not as regulated as the TVA was. It's nice to see that Don is being a much better dad in this scene. He's roughhousing with his boys.
Yeah.
Like you do.
And then off to have dinner inside.
Yeah. As the inmates are running the asylum.
Yeah, it did seem like this version of Don was a better dad than the one we saw earlier.
Well, and it begs the question. Does it beg the question? Anyway, it begs the question of, did Don have some understanding of his experience that Loki took him on? That he had some idea, some vague taste of losing everything. I mean, literally fading out of existence. So maybe this Don has that touch in him that makes him want to be a better dad.
Yeah.
To be more present with his kids. He
knows what he could lose.
Yes.
And appreciates what he has much more from that touch. That is completely possible. And I completely accept that headcanon.
You accept my interpretation.
And then while Mobius is watching the scene play out, Sylvie walks up.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently she still has He Who Remains' Tempad thing. And what are you going to do, Sylvie?
Yeah, Sylvie's off on her own adventure. She now has complete free will. She's not looking over her shoulder. She's not hiding in an apocalypse. Nobody's coming after her.
She doesn't have to worry about the Yeah, she doesn't have to worry about the TVA hunting her down.
Exactly. She now actually gets to live a life.
Yeah. She's going to use the second chance
Mm-hmm.
that Loki has given them.
Mm-hmm.
While Mobius is just going to wait here a little bit.
Yep.
And let time pass.
And we get that line echoed a little bit as we pull back into Yggdrasil and Loki among the branches, at the center
Mm-hmm.
of the branches, with this fantastic expression that is, there's a happiness to it, but it is a very sad happiness. It is wistful. He misses his people, but he knows he's doing what he has to do.
Yeah. It felt content.
Yes.
It's not joy per
Mm-mm.
se. He's not happy necessarily, but he knows he's where he's supposed to be.
Yeah.
And I like to think that he is able to watch his friends
Yes.
from where he is. And the ending theme comes in.
Mm-hmm.
And again, like we talked about earlier, it's just these little variations.
Mm-hmm.
Something about this ending theme here felt more triumphant. It felt more complete somehow.
No, I agree with you on this. Yeah. It was an ending. It was a good ending. We won, technically.
Mm-hmm.
It's not bragging either, but it is making the we won statement. I found it interesting through the end credits that all the main actors, all the usually credited actors, got credit this time. Because usually at the end of episodes, you get
only the actors who actually appeared
in the episode. The shot is still there. There's just no actual name in it. But everybody, even the characters, Brad is somewhere in post-pruning land.
Well, but I will point out that the actor who played Brad does show up in this episode. So brief, I didn't catch it until the second time.
Oh, I blinked and I missed him. Where was he?
When Loki comes in earlier and says, "Miss Minutes, I know you're angry with me."
Oh yeah, he would be in there. Yep.
He is sitting down in that scene. He is one of the people looking at Loki, but because we were all staring at Miss Minutes and her expression, we miss you miss Brad. Unless, like I said, I missed it on my first watch through, but the second time I was like, "Oh hey, Brad."
Yeah.
So yeah, Brad shows up.
Brad shows up.
He is technically in this episode. He has no lines, but he is in this episode.
General Docs got credited as well, and she wasn't in the episode at all. So
okay, Docs definitely was not.
Yeah, everybody got credited because it's the last episode. It's the end of things.
It's like the ending of a movie. You list everyone in it, and that's these Disney shows. For the most part, feel more like movies than TV shows.
They're made with the same care of movies. They're made with the same level of production value as a good movie. That you
absolutely.
Want high
They've got Disney money
for.
Behind them.
They do have Disney money behind them, and Disney people, who have the skills to do this stuff.
Yeah. But it's not just that, it's all of these, even though they will sometimes lead into a future project, like, Loki season 1 led into Loki season 2, or WandaVision led into Multiverse of Madness, or that sort of thing, they still feel like they have a beginning, middle, and end. They feel like they are a complete story. Rather than a season of television that could be, if you're in the 3rd season of a 7-season show, or you're in the 4th season of a 7-season show, for the most part, you can swap any of those episodes and it's not going to matter.
Yeah.
These are serialized and more complete than most television.
Well, especially the television we grew up with. I feel like
absolutely.
Some
I mean, there's some prestige television like Game of Thrones and...
Well, and these Loki especially had a very specific story to tell and a very specific set of arcs to complete.
Mhm.
This wasn't a monster of the week. Your standard season of Supernatural has a big meta plot, like a big story going through the whole season.
Yes.
But 3/4 of your episodes are going to be monster of the week with
just a
couple
little touch
in the beginning
of...
Yeah, it's going to be a couple episodes in the beginning, then mid-season, and then the season finale is all going to be the big plot.
Mhm.
The rest is monster of the week with little bits.
Right.
They're little things that build on. Buffy was like that. You had the big thing, but then again, there was still monster of the week in between. I don't watch.
Well, it's the difference between a 22 episode season and a
Yes.
6 episode season.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Short seasons mean that you need to focus and you're not filling time.
Yeah.
That you have set down a very specific story and you've broken it into chapters, which are going to be your episodes. And therefore you have to pace it out correctly in order to, you have a beginning and middle and end of every episode, but they also build to the beginning, middle, and end of an entire series.
Story, yeah.
Yeah.
Which is going to make Daredevil very interesting.
Oh.
Because Daredevil Born Again, now things may have changed because the original showrunners were let go and new directors, writers, everything have come on since. But the original plan was for Daredevil Born Again to be an 18 episode season. So if that's still true, I think we could have a lot more courtroom drama.
Yeah. Quite literally, since Matt Murdock's a lawyer.
Yeah, exactly. Which I would absolutely love. They touched on some of the courtroom stuff in She-Hulk.
Uh-huh.
But I want to get more superhero law.
by night, superhero by night, lawyer by day.
Yeah.
And coping with the idea that superheroes are a thing and therefore law applies to them, which is one of the fascinating things with She-Hulk. I am sorry I could not join you for some episodes of She-Hulk. Our timing never worked out on that one.
Yeah.
Oh, that series was
but
really
I had some great guests for that, so
good.
I was very happy with the conversations we had.
Good. Yeah, I'm interested to see what they do with Daredevil, considering the tone that the Netflix Marvel series had versus the tone that our MCU generally has, and what you're going to want with Disney. If you got the Disney brand behind you, you're not going to have the hyperviolence that Kingpin was dealing out.
You say that.
I do.
But have you seen the trailer for Echo?
Yes, I have. Yeah, no, it's a fair point.
Our conversation drifted even more off topic as we continued. If you're really interested in our additional MCU thoughts, you can join Patreon for the uncut version. One final huge thank you again to Anne for joining me to discuss the show. I asked her if she wanted to plug anything or had any social media presence she wanted to advertise, but she declined. I'll be taking a week off as I return to regular scripted episodes releasing every other week. If you have a question/topic you'd like covered in one of those, I'm always grateful for those suggestions. Please send them, or thoughts on the show in general, via email to welcome2geektown, all spelled out, @gmail.com. Or you can go to the website, welcome to, the number 2 in this case, geektown.com, and click the submit a question link if you prefer to remain anonymous. Other contact options include facebook.com/welcome to geektown, Twitter @geektownpodcast, Mastodon @welcome-to-geektown @mastodon.social, or Blue Sky @welcome-to-geektown.bluesky.social. Also, if you'd like to support the show directly, why not become a patron at patreon.com/welcome-to-geektown for just $1 per month to get access to full scripts to the shows, audio outtakes, and a monthly shoutout. You can also help the show grow by subscribing and giving a 5-star review over on Apple Podcasts to join the Geektown City Council, which helps other people find the show, so we can all tell them,
Welcome to Geektown. Population, us.
Welcome to Geektown is written, narrated, edited, and produced by me, Kurt Onstead. Theme music is by Aaron Levitz, logo art by Archie Santana. All other sound clips are the copyrighted material of their respective owners, and no infringement is intended, falling under fair use.